Alright, now we're gonna do a classic called The Shining. So basically got this guy by the name of Jack, he's going to this hotel. He talks to the guy that runs it, basically his name is Illman. Now apparently Jack used to be a school teacher, but now he wants to be a writer. We found out the hotel was actually built in like 1907, but he tells him about one particular incident that happened in the 70s. See, there was this guy by the name of Grady, he had his 2 kids and his wife. One night this dude Grady ended up killing his entire family with an axe, and then he took a shotgun and blew his own brains out. But that didn't deter Jack from getting in the place. He's supposed to be having it from like May up to October or whatever. So I'm thinking to myself, what is the job that he's applying for up here? Well, anyway, he gets the application, and he's gonna bring his wife Wendy and his son Danny up there. Now Danny's just chilling watching cartoons or whatnot, eating cereal. So the thing is, Danny has this friend or imaginary friend or other personality named Tony. And Tony starts talking the moment he lifts his finger and start waving and stuff. Now we're not sure exactly what Tony is, but when Danny explains him, he's like, he talks from the inside of his mouth or whatever. So while he's in the bathroom brushing his teeth, Tony tells him that Jack is gonna call Wendy and let her know that he's got the job or whatever. Seconds before it actually happens, I'm like, the fuck? So we're like, can Danny tell the future? So while he's in the bathroom, Danny has these visions about this escalator or whatever like that and all this blood coming from it. I guess at that point he had passed out, because Wendy had called in a doctor or a specialist to make sure that Danny was okay. Then Danny told the specialist about Tony. Like, she really gonna believe that shit. She was just like, okay, like, get some rest, Danny. So the specialist and Wendy go into another room to talk. And Wendy started telling her about this incident with Jack and Danny. Now Danny apparently he accidentally spilled some papers all over the floor or whatever. And he had pulled on Danny's arm to go to the room or whatever. Now at this time, Jack was drunk. I guess he pulled on him too hard, and that's how he had dislocated his shoulder back then. This incident happened about 3 years ago. Well, the conversation came up when they would talk about Danny in schools and stuff like that, and how he wasn't really going to certain schools, and then he dislocated his shoulder, and that's how the conversation came up. But what came out of it was Jack had stopped drinking, and he's been sober ever since then. So afterwards, it comes to a point where he's finally about to get his family out there to the hotel. Now, the way this place is set up, Jack asked the guy, like, oh, you got snow here. It's great. Like, how come you don't have a ski lodge? So the guy reiterates in the wintertime, yeah, they get too much snow. And because of the terrain it's built on, it's not really safe for anybody to drive up there around those times. So that's why they don't have a ski lodge. So they're finally at this hotel, and this hotel is big. Like, every room is fucking ridiculously big, from the dining room, what they call the gold room, to the lobby part, to the kitchens. Now, the guy that's giving the tour guide, whatever, he gives like little random facts. He said a lot of celebrities and actors come here. Hell, he said even 4 presidents came here. So while Jack and Wendy are exploring certain parts, Danny ends up going into the game room. Now, while he's in the game room throwing darts, he turns back around and he sees these 2 little girls holding hands. They got on blue dresses. They're just staring at him. We think to ourselves, who the fuck are they? Well, anyway, Danny ends up meeting back up with the family. Then we got this guy by the name of Mr. Holleran. He's like their chef. So while Jack is talking to the other guy, Mr. Holleran shows around Wendy and Danny to the, the kitchen and whatnot. They show them to the freezer. They got plenty of food there. This other room, they got like canned vegetables, all types of stuff. So anyway, Jack meets back up with Wendy and they talk to the other tour guests. Now, Mr. Holleran is going to stay with Danny. He's going to get him some ice cream and stuff like that. But the thing is, when just the 2 of them are talking, he actually tries to talk to him about this power that he has called the Shine. But when he starts asking Danny about it, Danny said he can't really talk about it because Tony won't let him. Now, the suspicion came about when he was with Wendy or whatever like that, and he started calling Danny Doc. So Wendy's like, how do you know we call Danny Doc? He gave some type of vague answer saying he probably heard her call her that, whatever. But I'm pretty sure she didn't say that around Mr. Holleran. So he tells him about this so-called power that he has too. Then he says, whatever you do not go into room 237. He's pretty vague about it, and he doesn't really give any explanation. But I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the Grady incident back in 1970. So anyway, he meets back up with everybody. They look on the outside or whatever. Out in the front, they got this bush-like maze. I mean, it's very complicated, but at the same time, it's kind of easy if you know your way if you're looking around for stuff. During the daytime, anyway. And once again, the guy talks about the place being built in 1907, but it took them 2 years to build it. And apparently, they were trying to build this while Indians were throwing brigades and shit back then. Yeah, they were building on Indian grounds. I'm like, how the hell could they even able to finish and make it like this luxurious? Crazy. So yeah, basically, they're going to be in this place for about 5 months. So at this point, they've been there for about a whole month now. Wendy's fixing Jack breakfast and everything. Everything seems all copacetic for the time being. But once again, he's got to get back to writing and doing stuff, you know what I mean? Now, while he's doing that, Wendy and Danny are exploring the outside and stuff. They will start walking around the maze, just playing around and all that. Now, sometimes Danny's riding his bike. He goes off by himself, and he ended up riding past room 237. He tried to go in, but the door was locked, and then he got back on his bike and went about his business. About a week goes by at this point. You can tell Jack is getting a little bit frustrated because he can't think of anything to write. He's at like writer's block. And then she kind of comes in and interrupts him, but she's like, she just wants to fix him some sandwiches or whatever. And Jack looks like he's about to spaz out. He's like, please don't interrupt me while I'm doing my work, you know what I'm saying? And he's trying to do his work, but at this point, you can tell he's about to kind of snap. I mean, think about the isolation. It's only them 3. You can tell from the lack of sleep, he's starting to get insomnia for real. So throughout all this time, Danny ends up having another vision. He keeps having these visions about this thing called red rum. And then we see him riding his bike again. This time he's riding his bike in the hallways again, and he stops and he sees the 2 little girls again. They're just holding hands. Then all of a sudden they're just laid out dead. I'm like, what the fuck? This is where we figure out these are probably Grady's kids that he killed. So at this point, you're thinking to yourself, yeah, he was able to see into the future because he heard the phone call and all that stuff, but now he's looking back into the past of 1970? What exactly is Danny? Is Tony the one controlling him? I mean, like, what's going on? And at this point, Jack, you could tell, is definitely losing his mind, once again having insomnia. Then a whole nother week goes by, and we find out the snow is coming down, the storms are getting even worse. So yeah, Danny ends up riding around on his bike again or whatever like that. Then we see Jack laid out, you know what I'm saying? He's asleep next to a typewriter, and you can tell he's having this one of these horrible ass dreams. He just starts screaming. And Wendy's in another room messing with the connections and stuff like that. She can't get any phone calls out. Yeah, messing with the switchboards and whatnot. So then she ends up going towards the radio, and she's able to talk to like Force Patrol or whatever like that. And then they end up explaining the situation to her, saying that yeah, the snow probably knocked out all the connections and whatnot, but you can always call through the switchboard. So after all this, she ends up hearing Jack screaming. She ends up running to Jack. While this is going around on Danny's like riding his bike again, he ends up going past 237, but the thing is the door's already open. He ends up going in the room, and who knows what just happened, you know what I'm saying? Next thing we see Wendy comforting Jack, and then all of a sudden, Danny coming back out, and he's just like, wow, this slow walk. And then she goes to check on Danny, then she notices there's something on his neck. It was like, looked like scratches or something like that. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she blames it on Jack. I'm like, what the fuck? He's been downstairs the whole time, sleep. So she gets mad, picks up Danny and them going back into their room. Jack is pissed off. Afterwards, he ends up going into the gold room. You know, basically like the dining room area and whatnot. Now, I want you to keep in mind, once again, nobody's in here. And when they're doing the tour, they establish the fact that no drinks or liquor comes in through here after like a certain amount of weeks or whatever. So there's no liquor in this place at all. Now, Jack, all of a sudden, I think he just starts hallucinating. He's talking to some guy named Lloyd that's supposed to be a bartender. All of a sudden, you see all these drinks lined up and Lloyd's about to serve him and shit. He's drinking bourbon and scotch and whatnot. But keep in mind, none of this is actually there. So at this point, he's basically hallucinating. Afterwards, he goes back upstairs and starts to talk to Wendy. No, scratch that. Wendy came back down. And she said Danny told her there was some lady in that room in 237 and they put the scratches or tried to strangle him or something like that. So we gotta be thinking to ourselves, what the fuck, ain't nobody up here? So Jack and Wendy go back upstairs to check on Danny. Danny's asleep. Or pretending to be asleep, because when we see him, his eyes are wide open. Jack ends up going to the room 237 to try to figure all this stuff out. And we see this lady in the bathtub. She gets up and just stands up and starts staring at Jack. And then all of a sudden, they start kissing. But then this lady all of a sudden turns into an older lady. Then we see her in the tub just laid out. I'm thinking to myself, once again, he must be hallucinating. And this lady was probably the wife that Mr. Grady killed. So it gets to a point, Jack goes back up to talk to Wendy, and then things kind of get out of control. And he's just straight pissed off at everything, and then he leaves out the room. Now, when we come to Mr. Holloran, he's back at his house or whatever like that, and he hears about this 10 feet of snow that's supposed to be coming down, and he's just like staring out for the space. We're like, all right, what the heck is going on with him? So he tries calling the hotel, doesn't get an answer. He calls through the switchboard, and the forest people pick up again. He's just trying to make sure everybody's okay. So they say they're going to call there to try to make sure, and then they're like, call me back in like 20 minutes. He's like, all right, cool. But the switchboard didn't get any answer. So Mr. Howard's thinking to himself, he's going to need to drive up there. So it's going to take like 5 hours, but bottom line is he's going to find a way to get up there. So after the argument, Jack goes back downstairs. He ends up going to the gold room again, but then we see a whole bunch of people in there now. Once again, there's nobody there. This is all in his head. He ends up going to Lloyd again, getting some scotch. He tries to pay him. He's like, no charge. It's on the house. So Jack is like, by who? And then Lloyd's like, I'm not at liberty to say. So when he's getting up drinking his bourbon, he accidentally runs into one of these waiters. The waiter's like, oh, I'm sorry. Let me clean that up for you. You know what I'm saying? And then they go to the bathroom to clean up. Then as they're talking in the bathroom, we found out the guy that he's actually talking to is actually Mr. Grady, or the guy he's supposedly talking to. And when they start talking about his family, he was like, yeah, you know, I had to discipline him. I'm like, then we find out Jack is still thinking about Wendy saying that she'll never forgive him for, 3 years ago. He still has that in the back of his mind with the whole dislocated shoulder thing. So Grady is basically telling him to discipline his family. Like, boy, there's a lot of hallucinations going on in this place, right? So Wendy and Danny are just chilling in the room or whatever like that. And then she's like, I'll be right back. I got to go talk to your father. So when she go downstairs, she ends up going downstairs with a bat because, you know what I'm saying, the tension's building in this. So she's basically going down there looking for Jack, and then she ends up stumbling on his typewriter or whatever. And she stumbles with what he's been writing. Now, what he's been writing? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. This sentence is across the entire page. In fact, this sentence is across all of the pages that he's written about. I'm like, dude, this has been writing about nothing. And we're like, yeah, Jack is completely snapped. You mean to tell me that's what he's been writing for the last 2 months? So then all of a sudden, Jack shows up behind her. They start talking and basically scaring the shit out of her. Talk about Danny needs help, he needs to get a doctor. And possibly Jack too. And she's swinging his bat around as she's walking back up the stairs that he's like forcing going towards her. And then when he's at the steps, she's like, yeah, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to bash your brains in. I'm like, the fuck? Meanwhile, the whole time she's backing up and swinging his bat. Now at this point, she's at the top of the steps. Jack lunges for her and he ends up hitting her. She ends up hitting him in the head with a bat. And he stumbles down the steps and collapses. So what does Wendy decide to do at this point? She's dragging him all the way into the kitchen. And she ends up locking him in the walk-in refrigerator. So she's thinking to herself at this point, she's going to take the snowmobile and get up out of there with Danny. But the thing is, back then, when she was looking at the typewriter, Jack ended up pulling out the cables of the snowmobile. I was like, wow. And he also disconnected the radio, which is the reason why the Force Patrol couldn't get through when they was trying to call the hotel. So it gets to a point, since Jack can't go nowhere, he pretty much falls asleep in there. Now, at this point, his leg is pretty messed up. I guess it got messed up when he tumbled down the steps. So while he's in this walk-in refrigerator, he keeps hearing voices behind the other side of the refrigerator, and it sounds like Mr. Grady. He's having this conversation with himself about finishing the job, and somebody let him out on the other side. You're thinking to yourself, there's no way it could have been Mr. Grady because he died back in 1970. Who the fuck let him out? There's only 3 people in there. Now we go to the room, we see Wendy sleep, and Danny keeps saying red rum all over again. Now what is red rum backwards? Obviously murder. But he ends up writing it on the door. Now Wendy, before she left the kitchen, ended up picking up this big ass butcher knife. Danny picks it up, and then he picks up some lipstick, and that's when he starts writing on the door. And he's just holding the blade there, talking about red rum, red rum, red rum, and he just keeps saying it louder. That's all of a sudden Wendy wakes up, takes the knife. And when she wakes up, she's still trying to think of a way to get out of it. And all of a sudden, Jack is at the front door with a daggone axe. He's chopping away in. So Danny and Wendy end up hiding in the bathroom. And she opens up the window so Danny can slide down out of the window or whatever like that, but it's not opening up wide enough for Wendy to get through. Wendy at this point basically tells Danny to run. Jack ends up getting into the bathroom door, starts chopping that shit, puts a hole in it, and then we get the iconic line, "Here's Johnny." He tries to unlock it, but then she ends up swiping a knife across his hand like, ah, shit. Yeah, at that point, he didn't realize that she took the knife out the kitchen. Then all of a sudden, he stops trying to get in because he keeps hearing a noise. He hears a truck outside. Turns out it's Mr. Holloran's truck. He finally made it to the hotel. So Mr. Holloran walks in. He's looking for anybody. He's like, hey, is anybody here? What's going on? All of a sudden, you see Jack come out of nowhere. He takes an axe to his chest. Mr. Holloran's done did his shit. And at this point, Jack ends up seeing Danny running around the kitchen, so now the chase is on. But once again, Jack's leg's messed up, so he can't run as fast as Danny can right now. So at this point, Wendy thinks it's safe to come out, because Jack ends up turning on all these lights and going outside to try to chase down Danny. Danny ends up running into the maze, and Jack goes after him. Now, Wendy comes out, she's searching around for Danny. You see all these crazy ass images. She ends up going across this one door. She sees inside the room this guy in a suit, and this other guy in a bunny suit about to get this dude head. You're just like, what the fuck? Then she ends up going to the hallway where Mr. Holloran is laying there dead. Then she turns around and ends up seeing Mr. Grady with his head split talking about something. Are you enjoying your day? You stay here? So clearly she's seeing shit too. Now while all this is going on, Danny is still running around. He stops for a minute. Then he starts to backtrack, right? Then he goes to the other side and hides in the bushes, but he covers up his tracks to the feet. So by the time Jack gets there, he loses the trail of footprints. He ends up going one way, Danny ends up going another. Danny ends up hearing Wendy calling. He finally gets out of the maze. They get into the truck that Mr. Holloran left, and they about to dip off. Meanwhile, Jack is still stumbling around. He's stuck in his maze, and it gets to a point where he can't even keep running no more because he's getting cold, and his leg gives out on him. Next thing we see, Jack is dead as shit, buried in the snow. The final image we see is this, in the gold room, they see these pictures up on the wall. This one particular picture had all the people that Jack was seeing in the gold room, and Jack was actually standing in the middle of it. The picture was taken on July 4th back in 1921. And that's the end of the movie. So you think to yourself, what does this mean? Was Jack here before? Was all this a delusion? Did he have an ancestor back in the day that looked just like him? Does this movie take place in present time? Because back then it came out in like 1980. Hell, even the situation we're talking about with Grady happened in the 70s. What was the deal with Danny and his shine power? How was he able to predict the future or like 5 or 10 seconds into the future? And then see a situation that took place back in the 70s. He wasn't even born. A whole lot to unpack here, but that shit was crazy. Old school classic. If you get to see it, maybe it's on YouTube or something like that. But bottom line is, check it out.